Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Always good to be with you on a Wednesday morning. We're back to Wednesdays now. And yeah, it's good. Bright sunny day. It's cold, but I'm doing okay.
Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and transition us into our next morning ritual, so to speak, which is say what we're grateful for. And this morning, as usual, I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. I'm grateful for my mother to be alive and to have sound mind and still be able to experience her. I'm grateful for a roof over my head, problems as challenges and that I have in my life. Through those problems, I know there's blessings on the other side. I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to connect and grow and learn and be here on this podcast with you this morning. So it's my gratitude moment.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so I'm grateful for heat this morning. Maybe having a roof over my head, having indoor plumbing, food in a refrigerator. Really some basic things I never take for granted. For having as far as I can tell, relatively sound mind and a still functioning body. And actually something real specific in particular, last night we dog sat for a friend of my partner's who had a little box terrier. It's probably about a year old. And they are getting married and they had all kinds of things. So they wanted to put her up for the night. So we had this little box terrier in the house. And it was just fun. So I know you know more about dogs than I do, but it was a good presence in the house. So I'm grateful for that little spark of canine joy for about 24 hours.
You say it's about a year old?
Yeah, it might be a little bit more than a year, but still a puppy. Yeah.
So they have them house trained to the point where.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Good. That's the main thing you got to make sure when you house sit or you ask someone to house sit your dog. To me, your dog should be able to definitely be house trained and definitely have the ability to be told to sit, come, stay. You have to have those commands down if you're gonna ask someone to wash your dog.
Yeah. They actually gave us like a single page instruction sheet for habits, feeds, commands that the dog understands. So it was actually good. It was fun. The owners of this particular dog did a good job. So yeah, hopefully we didn't do any damage.
Excellent. And so before we get started with our topic today, what's your spiritual energy number?
I'm at a 10. And I think Rosie the dog probably helped me stay there this morning. But I'm definitely at a 10.
I'm at a 10 too. I tell you, a lot of times you and I both say 10s, and I know we both mean it, but I want folks to realize that it's not always easy to be a 10. There's things that happen in your life that your ego tells you that you're not a 10, but you can't listen to ego. You got to push through it and say, I want to be a 10 because this is the benefit. This is the bonus I get. This is the tap into that 10 energy is far more fulfilling and satisfying. And the frequency that you tapped into, I believe, is directly into the frequency of love when you're at 10. And the closer you are, obviously, you can connect to that energy. But the further you're away, obviously, it's like the radio dial, you're just getting static. So that's why I see the benefit and the value of always being a 10, even though it's challenging. So just want to let folks know that it's not easy. It's because we say it, it's definitely not easy, but it becomes something along the lines of being fully human, which is an excellent segue into what our topic is today.
Yeah, so we've been speaking about healing America's narratives, the feminine, the masculine, and our collective national shadow, becoming more fully human for well over a year and a half now. And excuse me, last week we spoke about what I jokingly refer to as the 3rd and a half subjugation, or the almost 4th subjugation, because there were 3 foundational subjugations in the founding and history of the United States: that of women, that of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and that of Africans and then African Americans. But if we look closely, and this one, some people get a little bit rankled with this, but it's pretty easy to document. The fourth subjugation, which we dealt with last week, but we have some more to say about this week, is that of men who aren't wealthy. And what we mean by that is that the country was founded by wealthy white landowners. And when all men were created equal, that didn't include poor white guys who were blacksmiths or farmers, or, and when I say farmers, I don't mean plantation owners. I mean people with little plot of land, growing some food. They didn't have the right to vote. They weren't treated well. And there was actually a wonderful quote, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right. I'm going to paraphrase it. But back in around 1976, a woman, a doctor named Jean Baker Miller, wrote a book called Toward a New Psychology of Women. In other words, recognizing the importance of understanding some of the differences in acculturation between men and women. And I cite her in Healing America's Narratives. But one of the sentences that really stood out for me, and she had more than one of these, but the one that really stood out, she said, the few men who built major parts of this country did it at the expense of other men. So she's speaking about war, about the industrialization, transcontinental railroad, the steel industry, the oil industry. The people who made money from that weren't, or even the coal industry, they weren't going down to the coal mines themselves. They weren't hammering the spikes into the railroad ties. They weren't out there operating the oil rigs, most of the time. So those were the men who didn't bear the same fruit of their labor, but without whom the wealthy industrialists and nowadays the wealthy tech people can't get their wealth without the help of the people who are doing the work at the bottom of the totem pole. All right, Jeff Bezos doesn't become a 180 or $200 billion person without a lot of people working in warehouses, driving trucks, and answering, well, they don't really speak on the phone that much anymore, but doing whatever technologically they need to do. So that's what we're talking about. And there's a great example of that in current events right now. Not that we need to talk about this example, but I just want to put it out there to kind of set the tone. Last week, the courts in New York found Donald Trump, he was already found guilty of exaggerating the value of his properties. And the judge, found or ordered him to pay $350 some odd million in fines plus some $90 million in interest. So it's around $450 million he has to pay. And he has three other indictments against him, some criminal, some civil. And he's running for president, and he's not in jail. If you or I, or anybody that we perhaps know, was accused of sexually assaulting multiple women, was accused of overestimating our assets, even if it was just a house we owned and lived in order to avoid taxes and to get loans at a lower rate. In other words, to defraud the lenders. If we did anything to try to overturn the results of a legal election, we would be in jail right now. We wouldn't be able to pay the bail. We wouldn't be able to pay multiple teams of attorneys millions of dollars. And so that's the difference when we talk about this fourth subjugation. The average guy, and it's true about the average woman too, but we're talking about men right now. The average guy can't get away with what Donald Trump is getting away with. Back in the economic, the recession of 2007, 2008, when the banks and the real estate companies floated all these mortgages to people who couldn't afford to pay them back, and especially the variable rate mortgages, and the whole economic system imploded, none of the leaders, the CEOs or C-suite executives in all of the banks who were responsible for this, not one of them was held accountable for that disaster. There was one guy, like a mid-level bank manager, who I think served a little bit of time, and that was like, as a joke. It was embarrassing. They all got bailouts. The companies all got bailouts. The government helped them recover. So there's this whole playing field that's really uneven. And again, it's obviously much more uneven for women, Indigenous peoples, and African Americans historically. We're not saying to poor men is the same type of subjugation, but it's there nonetheless. And this is the last thing I'll say, post World War II, for a variety of reasons that are too complex to get into in this conversation, a lot of people were able to live decent middle-class lives, moving into the early 50s, mid-50s, late 50s, into the 60s, and even into the 70s. It began to shift in the 80s for a variety of reasons under Reaganomics and trickle-down and other lies, where a lot of industries were deregulated. The middle class began to disappear. And this is the middle class regardless of your skin pigmentation, your gender, or anything. And nowadays, it's not a real healthy economy for the average person. Top 1%, definitely. Top 10%, absolutely. But that middle 90% or so, that's actually 80% or so that's above the poverty line, really struggle. So this is this other subjugation, this idea, if you're not really wealthy, the systems don't work as well for you, and you could be a disagreement, an accident, an injury, or a disease away from bankruptcy and financial ruin, not to mention the rest of your life. So that's what we're talking about, the unequal distribution of wealth, of justice in the court system, of access to the justice system. It's really not an even field. And again, we're not saying that everybody should be, have a net worth of $1 million or some other number. We're just saying the system is skewed to better serve those who have more disposable and discretionary income than those who don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This, as we talked about last week, that, I always say, it's funny, I catch myself while I'm about to say it now, but I caught myself before I said it. The engineer in me is always in its systems. And like I said to folks, I'm never going to not mention that, because that's what governs us. We are governed by systems, whether they're, just name a few: the education system, the criminal justice system, legal system, the healthcare system, the financial systems. These systems govern our lives, and they have rules of how you must behave within that system. And those systems were built for the betterment of white rich men. And anyone who doesn't fit that demographic are not going to be able to navigate through these systems as well. And I even go further by saying, if you don't create your own system to help you navigate through those systems, then you're going to be at the reactionary, the mercy of that system, of those systems, and they're not going to be pleasant, because they're not designed for your betterment. They're designed for your exploitation, your subjugation, as you talk about. So it's not even when you can just be indifferent. It's like, no, it's going to come at you, and it's going to be upon you, and you're going to have to deal with that. And it's not going to be kind. Like, again, for example, the education system, if you don't really navigate properly through that, like if you just a person who goes through life and you've only been educated by the traditional education systems, public schools, they go to college, and that's your only educational um, base, then you're going to view the world totally different. Your identity that you define is going to be different. And that's going to have a direct output in life where more likely you're going to be a person that's going to be reacting to life more so than being proactive. Because our education system doesn't really teach you how to think, it teaches you how to learn enough to do your job and to be a better employee. That's basically what our education systems teach individuals. And that's why we don't find many individuals who understand really how to critically think and look at certain things and really understand how to go about continuing growth. And as you put yourself in that situation where you're saying, I want to create my own system, I believe it starts with the identity. I go back to that. Because to your point about folks who don't see, if I'm subjugated, it's difficult for me if I'm not a growth-minded individual, if I don't see myself as a fully human person, and I let my identity be my race or my religion or my ethnicity or my career or whatever other thing I choose my identity to view the lens through, then I'm not going to see white man's subjugation. I'm going to say, well, because you're white, you have every privilege that's out there, right? And all white people are equal across the board. And nothing can be further from the truth. Because I'm so been driven by my ego, that's how I'm going to look at it. And I can hear women who may say, well, men have it better, right? And then you can have folks who in another country say Americans have it better. So it's all about how you look at your identity. And I just mentioned this because what I'm really focusing my attention on growing and learning more about, and it's just really a simple, very simple statement that Albert Einstein said that everything is energy, energy is everything. And that's a very simple statement, but it's a very profound way to apply it and begin to look at life. And what I mean by it is this. I think, quote Malcolm X, he said that, but he was speaking about blacks being brought here, that we brought to this country, we're hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. But I really believe that Americans are. We've been hoodwinked. All of us ran amok, led astray. And that, going back to what you talk about in your book, false narratives. The false narrative that we get caught up in and that we hoodwinked around is that everything comes down to when you look at the world and interact with folks, or especially within our country, the connections that we make, the tribes that we live in, the forced tribalization that we live in is based off color or gender or sexual orientation, all these different little tribes we're forced into. And what I'm really advocating, what I'm really learning is that if you begin to see the world as a fully human being, then you see the energy and you feel the energy and you choose your connections based on the energy. So a black man can have just as bad energy, and more likely does, and I've experienced a lot of that, than a white man who looks totally opposite, totally different backgrounds. He grew up and maybe went to Ivy League schools, had two-parent household, had an upper middle class raising as far as his childhood, and had resources and opportunities. But I can be more in line with him on principles than I can the black man who grew up right next to me, who's in the same age range I'm in, and saying culturally we definitely have those things in common. But my energy is more in line with the white man. That's where I'm getting at. And when you throw away the false narrative, that's what you focus on. I'm gonna judge people's behaviors and their energy output, and let that be my guide when I need to bring you into my world. Not the color of your skin, not your gender, not your sexual orientation, not your religion, not your age, or any of these other tribes that we want to be placed in, but just the energy that you emit. And that for me is where I am with it. I believe if folks really begin to see things as that, then they wouldn't take it so personal and have hatred for folks who are different from them from a physical standpoint. But more in line with them if they were to communicate. Like you talked about, I forgot, you said this at the very beginning when we were, before the show started or doing the show, I think you said doing the show, that the owners of the dog that you set gave you a list of commands. But see, what that is that's the essence of communication. So now dog can stay with you because now you can communicate with your dog. That's how powerful that communication is. Because without that list and not knowing the commands, you can have all the intent you want to say, okay, I'm going to watch this dog. But now you can't communicate with that dog, then you and the dog both are not going to have a good time. The dog's going to be confused. You're going to be confused and get frustrated. And that's how I see most people operate in the world today. We don't communicate with each other. We don't really know how to communicate, which goes back to the failure of our education system. I know I said a lot there, but that's just top of my mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with. I mean, there was a lot, and there was just one specific example came up. I want to just add one thing. In addition to this need to be able to have the intention of clear communication and to actually do it, we also nowadays face, and it's not just nowadays with social media and the digital technology. It's been going on for decades, probably centuries. It's just you can get more bad information to more people more quickly nowadays because of technology. And so something that in my ongoing reading, there was one example that really struck me. It had to do with the 2016 election. This is a little bit off the topic of non-wealthy men, but I'll bring it back in. So in the once the Council for National Policy and the Koch brothers industries and the DeVos family and the Prince families and all the people with money, and there were many more than just those, under the umbrella of this organization called the Council for National Policy. Once they realized that Jeb Bush, who was the legacy candidate for 2016, that's the one they all figured was going to do it, another Bush in the White House, well, he just didn't have the chops. He just wasn't charismatic. He wasn't good in debating. Right, so he fell by the wayside. Their next favorite was Ted Cruz, whose father was actually a kind of a fundamentalist pastor. He was a Cuban immigrant. Ted was a first-generation Cuban American, and when Ted Cruz couldn't match Donald Trump, he fell by the wayside. So the Republican voters wanted Donald Trump. Some didn't understand who he was. Some did and wanted him anyway. But one of the things that they did in terms of combating, this is the information piece, in terms of combating a political opponent, and both sides do this. The Republicans and conservatives are professionals. The Democrats and the liberals are amateurs. They're just not as good at it. Maybe because they're better people and they don't think attacking is the best way to do things. But they put out millions of contact hits, knocking on doors, pamphlets, emails, texts, and phone calls. Because the fundamentalist right agenda is, anti-choice. And they wanted, one of their agendas was to fill up the Supreme Court with Republican justices and overturn Roe v. Wade. They've been speaking about that since Roe v. Wade was passed in the 70s. So what I'm getting to is they actually put in writing that Hillary Clinton, who was pro-choice, right? So she was pro Roe v. Wade, no contest there, that she was in favor of abortion right up until the delivery date. In other words, that she was okay with a woman going in about to deliver a baby and, after 9 months of gestation and having an abortion. And that was like complete, there was no truth to that at all. But tens of millions of mostly middle American voters believe that. And there were other stories I could get into as well. I want to tie that back into what we're talking about. There is this myth handed down by the lonesome cowboy out on the range, and the pioneers like Daniel Boone, who is a real person, an Indian fighter. That's what men are. We're rugged individualists. We suck it up. When things are bad, we don't complain. We just get it done. And there are moments when that's not a bad trait to be able to call on if things are really difficult amid a battle with disease or injury or taking care of your family, to just keep doing what's important. But it's the whole myth that that's what every man should be. And you can say that out loud now. Let people say, yeah, man up, just do it. But if you speak about a myth about what every woman should be, that's been exploded. I don't know any man who would say that out loud in a room full of women. All right. I don't know any sane person that would say that about a different race. What Black men should do or what Latinos should do because they're this. We don't do that. But there is that underlying myth of masculinity still applied to especially the worker bees. And I was educated to be a worker bee. My father was a World War II veteran, and he made his living as a plumber. He worked till he was 71. I don't know how he did that, because I know my hands and feet are almost 70. They're 69 years old, and I can't imagine going to work every day, a cold winter day with a pipe wrench and a rotor-rooter machine and all the other accoutrements of working as a plumber. But he sucked it up. That was, he was born into that myth. And thanks to him and my mom, I was able to move beyond that. He didn't want me to be a plumber. But it's this idea of all of these stories are out there, and not enough Americans, in my estimation, and on the left and the right, are willing to do the work to see what's true, both in the daily news, what really happened today or yesterday, and in terms of the underlying myths, what we have been referring to as cultural givens, that impact all of us, even those of us who intentionally do the work of reflecting on what was given to us culturally, revising what needs to be changed, getting rid of what is obviously not true, and then learning new things. So men, non-wealthy men, regardless of their skin pigmentation or their ethnicity, have been subjugated in that regard. So wealthy landowners, to use that phrase, can make tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and in this case nowadays tens and hundreds of billions of dollars, and then keep the money for themselves. So it's if we go back to what you said, if we just recognized our common humanity, where our identity wasn't gender, race, orientation, it was human. Oh yeah, same species, got it. And saw the inequities and how billions of people are treated on the planet. Because the worst case scenario in this country, which is still really bad and difficult, is like almost wealthy in some other places.
Right.
Yeah, if you can afford a cheap apartment and there's clean water in it and you have a stove and you can afford some basic food, you're better off than hundreds of millions of people in this world. And again, in no way minimizing the day-to-day struggle to make rent, which I've done most of my life. I'm not sitting on I've spent too much money on books. I'm not sitting on, so I'm not struggling like I'm worried about next month per se, but I have to be aware and careful. If we all just saw that, not to ignore history, but say, okay, if there's need to resolve some historical truths, let's resolve them. But right now, moving forward, for our great grandchildren's sake, whether or not you have kids or grandkids. Think of the people you know who have them. Think of their children. We could do such a much better job if we just cared about each other, regardless of all those identifiers that politicians and news celebrities keep showing us all of the conflict, because that's what pays their bills.
Right.
The conflict is important. If the world were humming along pretty well, and there was some suffering, but nothing like what we're experiencing. But if we stopped gun violence, if we stopped horrible wealth inequalities, if we stopped all of that, if the war in Ukraine were resolved, if the Palestinian, specifically the Hamas-Israeli conflict, were resolved, what are they going to talk about? So we'll go back to Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, I guess. I don't know. Just talk about some celebrity romance, and that's part of our dis-ease, and that's no disrespect to either one of those human beings, but the public's appetite for, and the media's willingness to satisfy that appetite, to look at photographs and videos and some false thing created about these two talented people. I mean, hey, live your own life. All right? Don't pay so much attention to these wealthy, talented people. And enjoy your concert, enjoy the football game if you watch it, but then let it go. Right? You can do more good in the world. But we're fed that, and unless you realize you're being fed that kind of information, it has you. You just you turn on the TV, you turn on you look at your phone, your computer, however you interact with it, and suddenly an hour is gone or 2 hours are gone, and you do that day in and day out. Whose life are you living? So anyway, that was my rant.
When you're talking about the working man, you talked about your father, a picture came to my mind that I always found to be very fascinating. It's an old photo, a 1932 photo, launched atop a skyscraper. And that to me is like the photo definition of what you're saying as far as the work ethic back then. Like the fact that these men would have such a physically challenging, dangerous job to begin with, but they're so caught up with the I'm just going to be a man and work ethic that I can sit on this beam that is 850 meters above the ground with 11 other people and just have lunch.
Yeah.
Right. And I could imagine being a middle person. Like you gotta hope that this person next to you doesn't hit you by accident, because one person falls, they're gonna pull the other person. Later on, it's been discussed that photo was a publicity stunt. To promote the RCA tower that was being constructed. But still, whether it's a publicity stunt or not, these men actually climbed on their beam and sat down and brought out some sandwiches. So, but it just goes to that point when you're talking about the masculinity and the identity of saying you're a man. Men do these type of activities, and do this for someone else, obviously, And it was funny. I was having a conversation with someone at a job that I have, and I'm not gonna mention the company, but it's a job that requires, blue collar work, delivery, and the gentleman was upset because he was saying how he's been there for like the last 7 years and he's not appreciated. No one's really appreciated at the company. The company doesn't give bonuses. So he was just really in his feelings and just ranting about how victim, constantly this is people should unite and come together. We're not being paid a lot, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just listening to him. I'm like, how this is a part-time job for him, just like it is for me. He's laying out all these reasons why he's not happy, but he's there. As though he has no other choice but to be there. But it's like, you're there, you're here, we're slaves. You work for someone else, you're a slave. So, that goes back to the education system again, because the system is what you're learning, what you're being fed mentally, will have you saying, I understand I need to work out every single day, but I'm not. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm just going to put shame on myself and guilt on myself for not doing it. And then that guilt's going to make me get heavier and increase more disease, as you talk about from a health context. Now I'm in a health system, and I'm going to really violate the rules in that system because of the fact is the education system's off. So that to me is where I see the majority of people. And then, like you said, so the escape now from all that in your mind, that noise you're creating as far as the unhappiness, the wishing for more, the longing for better days. So the way you get around from that and get yourself any kind of peace is to throw yourself into entertainment, football, sports, music. And so now, like as you talked about, the media now is going to feed that and give you overkill. It's like the media is like, if you say, okay, I'm going to go to McDonald's, I'm just going to give me, one fry and one hamburger. So you really literally going to get one fry. That's your intent. And then you get to McDonald's and say, well, no, we're going to give you 17 burgers and we're going to give you 50 fries and we're going to give you all these drinks to go along with it. And you take it and you try to consume that every single day. That's the kind of information overload. We go there with intent to just get one piece, but here's another ad. Here's another offer. Hey, have another burger. Have another fry. Have some more drinks. And I'm using that analogy because that's the same thing as the way we consume information. It's like we're consuming food, and if you don't control it, it's going to control you because now the information is going to tell you, well, this is what's important. So now go. Not only have, as you said before, you interact with your phone, you interact with your computer, you interact with your TV. Not only are you going to interact with yourself, I'm going to have you contact your network and you're going to discuss it. So now you're going to be interacting with other people talking about what I had you talk about. And it never ends. So at the end of the day, you look back and you say, what did I really accomplish today? Right? Now, those are the folks who are really being self-aware and realize I need to look at it in my day and look back at the hours, and that way I can correct myself going forward. But most folks are not self-aware enough, disciplined enough, focused enough to examine their 24 hours, and they end up letting there be a week and eventually it's so a lifetime. And the next thing you know, they're 40 years, 50 years, and they don't know where time is gone, and they blame other people. It's immigrants' fault. It was the gays' fault. It's the woke culture fault. Or no, it's the evil Republicans' fault because they're racist, right? So we can always blame someone else because of the choices we made, because again, we were not prepared to be living in these systems that control our behaviors. And as long as we continue to move without a purpose and without the intent of becoming more fully human and realizing it's a daily journey, it's a daily grind. And along that journey, you're going to have conversations, communicate, so you can heal some of the pain that has been in the history of this country. The growth of this country is full of pain, it's full of violence, it's full of subjugation, it's full of exploitation, but not so much to the point where you hear that and you receive that, you want to hate and go out and do things that are violent to who you feel are the recipients of that, the benefits of all that subjugation. You look at it and say, well, that was the history of it. What can we do to make it better now? Because through that, and I'll give you an example real quick of what I mean. It's all about perception and how you define things. I look at slavery as, number one, we were enslaved, not slave. But for me, I tend to look at it as a badge of honor in the context that there was ethnic cleansing that happened along those ways. From the Africans that were taken from Africa, and they go through the Middle Passage, and then go to the islands, the Caribbean islands, and they were what they call the slave breakers that would break the slaves down mentally before they even got to the United States itself, and then go through all that, and then go through Jim Crow and go through that. So for me, my ancestors who actually survived that I'm a descendant of that ancestor, and that to me is a very strong-willed person who went through that kind of ethnic cleansing. So I see some form of pride in that, and I attach onto that as opposed to feeling a victim of it. But if you choose to look at it from a negative context only, then you're going to look at it and say, I'm a victim. And as a victim, that this country was designed to enslave my people and was built on the back of my people, and there's nothing ever been done for that. And my people will continue to be subjected and exploited forever. And if that's the energy you're living with, then life would never be enjoyed. Life would be consistently problematic, unpleasurable. You're going to stay in survival mode and just really have and miss out on the joy of being a fully human.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the point that you've made there, and we've spoken about that before. This idea of, you know, the example of being a descendant of enslaved peoples, but any example of victimization would work as well. But here's a question that I have, because I agree with everything you just said, and your ability to recognize and say, wow, for somebody to have survived all of that, the kidnapping, the breaking down, the transatlantic crossing, the enslavement, and then the lynching and the Jim Crow, and then, you know, the civil rights movement and getting their heads cracked open on the streets of Selma, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To have, you know, there's some strong genetic material getting passed along there for the survivors, which I agree with 100%. So being able to recognize that, wow, you know, let me just make sure I appreciate what I received from that. And here's the thing I want to ask you. And this is just one example of it. So down in Florida, the governor down there, Ron DeSantis, in order to, you know, in removing what can be taught in history classes in that state, they actually put some things in there and describing, and they don't say enslavement. They say that slavery was actually good because it taught these Africans, you know, some skills they wouldn't have otherwise learned. So what I'm pointing to now is almost any truth can be co-opted by people with bad intent or harmful intent. You know, because what you just said, I agree with, and I understand the context with which you said it. Ron DeSantis would take that and say, yeah, I mean, slavery, you know, nowadays, descendants of slaves are, you know, are strong, you know, because of that experience. So slavery did good for the whole lineage. So how would you address that kind of co-opting of what you just said? Because it's probably not just Florida, but it's definitely happening in Florida.
Well, two things. First is that I'm speaking from a context of the enslaved individuals themselves had the wherewithal to survive that horrific incident of slavery. I think that in that example you gave, they were in the context of trying to say slavery itself was good because it created or it trained some skills. Right. I'm saying no. Well, the skills are irrelevant if the integrity, the discipline, and the love of the culture that was created as a result doesn't make it good to have that experience. And secondly, to look at the horrific crime that slavery was. So I'm looking at it from a context of just thinking about it differently, as opposed to saying I'm elevating slavery at all. I'm not. Slavery is a wicked institution at every level, but you have to control how you process it, as opposed to trying to lift up any kind of as far as slavery was good. Slavery was as evil as an institution as it possibly ever could have been, you know, contributed to the history of this country, of this world, I should say. But the individuals who survived, it's kind of like Viktor Frankl talks about what he went through in the concentration camps. And he said when they decided to kind of do probing on his body for medical experiments, he felt that was the lowest he can possibly seek. And he said, if I can still control my mind here and still find some positiveness here, then I'm in control. And that's what I'm saying. It's being able to choose your own way of reacting. Like you and I talk about at the very beginning of every show, that we choose to be a spiritual 10. We can choose it any reason in our lives that, you can say my hip's hurting, I didn't hear back from this contract I submitted, my bank account's low, my lady and I are arguing, whatever the issues that may be in your life, you can let them govern how you choose what number you choose. And so that's all I'm saying in the day is it's still being in control of my narrative and not allowing someone else to create a narrative for me to fit into, and I have not to live on their narrative. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I appreciate the clarity within which you stated that, because I have a visceral response when somebody takes what I'll say is a truth, something that's true, and then co-opt it to use it in a way that actually really refutes the actual truth in many ways. So you're teasing apart, okay, slavery. Nobody is saying that was good, but what you've been, what you've received because of the strength of those who survived that ordeal is something entirely different. So no, that was really clear and helpful.
It's kind of like if a woman is raped, violently raped, and the raper impregnates the woman, and 20 years later, a kid grows up to be the person that actually cures cancer. Now, do you say, okay, well, can the raper say, well, it's a good thing I did rape you because, our kid grew up to cure cancer? No, it's like the crime you did was still horrific. You should have never done it. But the kid and I made the mother who impacted the child made choices to make sure that they was not going to let the incident define them. And they were going to rise above that. And that's where the onus and the celebration or the accommodation, accreditation should be placed upon that and never the actual crime itself.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Thanks for that.
Well, we've had a great conversation. We've got 10 minutes left on our show. But one of the things I want to ask you was, when we talk about, and you and I have in our previous shows that we've had, we kind of went in depth with it, but I wanted to kind of revisit the summary of it right now, because I think it's important, the conversations we've had the last 2 weeks, as far as the healing aspect.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I think people stray away from reading materials like your book, the content, or even having these conversations because they don't know how to properly communicate. So can you talk about, when you talk about, again, what healing American narratives mean, the narratives are the subjugation of, whether it was women, African Americans, Native Americans, Vietnam vets, the fourth that we talked about, poor or not rich white individuals. How do we begin to heal through these conversations?
Yeah, that's an easy question to answer in a couple of minutes. So no, it's an important question. I can definitely touch on some ways into it. So one is just to clarify, when we use the word healing, when I use the word healing, we're not talking about fixing something, or curing something. That might happen as a result of the healing process, but the first step in healing is coming to terms with things as they are, in order to move toward wholeness. So I want to get really clear on what we mean by healing. So I'll use a physiological example. If I fall, when I'm a little kid, if I fall down and I break my arm, right, I have to come to terms with that. In other words, I can't make believe my arm's not broken. If I make believe my arm's not broken, it's going to get worse. It's never going to, get set properly. It's never going to heal. It might get infected. I could even die from it. So the first step in healing is, oh, that really hurts. My arm is broken. What do you do when your arm is broken? Well, you get to an orthopedic surgeon who can set it properly. So that's just the example. So in terms of narrative healing, what we're talking about here in all these different stories, in order to come to terms with things as they are, I have to be committed to getting to the truth. If I'm not committed to getting to the truth, then I can't heal in the way I'm using the word, because I'm going to be believing narratives that may or may not be true. So I have to do some work. If the last time I looked at this study, any information about how women were treated in the 1800s, or how indigenous peoples have been treated for 500 years by Europeans and Americans, or how Africans were treated coming across the Atlantic, and when they became African Americans, how they were treated then. If the last thing I ever read about that was from my middle school history book, then I have some work to do, because there's some great scholarship out there now, and even some movies. So first thing is, be committed to getting to the truth. If you're going to open your mouth about whatever issue, race, gender, violence, whatever it is, or the cascading effects of all of those together, which is really what I was trying to write about, do your work. You don't have to be an expert in every discipline, but you have to be somewhat knowledgeable and understand what a trustworthy source is like and what an untrustworthy source is like. All right, just as an example, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are not trustworthy sources. I don't care who's posting on them. If you're getting your information from there, you're looking for trouble. Whether whether it's Donald Trump posting or Barack Obama. All right, Twitter's not the place you want to go. Sorry. So that's one step. Get really curious about other people, specifically about people who are different from you. So look at it across gender, orientation, whatever. What is that person's life like? I mean, it's fine if they're the same as you too, because every second generation Italian American, which is me, we're not all alike. Right? I was never a member of the mob. That's kind of like a joke. But just get curious and don't assume because of your own experience that you know somebody else's experience, because you don't. So I'm going to just stop there. Healing is coming to terms with things as they are, which means seeking. Get curious about other people's stories, especially people who are different from you, but including those who you think are the same as you. I mean, those two things are worth their weight in gold. Begin with those, and what you'll discover is going to be remarkable. And then there's other steps you can take. King, do you hear music coming in and out?
Yes.
Okay, I just found it because I just didn't know if I was where that was.
Actually, that's on me. I didn't realize that you can hear that. I should have turned that off, actually. So yeah, it's a low frequency vibration music.
Okay. Yeah, it would come and go. It would come and go. I thought maybe somewhere between Baltimore and Thomaston, Connecticut, there was hitting a radio station or something. So those that would be my initial response. We can revisit that because there's a lot more to do. But absent a commitment to the truth, you're not going to heal anything. In terms of how I speak about it.
And the truth, a lot of people are not ready for that truth. That's why, I look at it and say, you got to be committed to the growth-minded portion of it.
Yeah.
Because nowadays I see so many people, because of social media, it's easy to get into what they call beefs, where, particularly you're an analyst or you're a blogger, and you get big enough on your platform where you can make a comment about somebody and it gets back to the individual. The individual then takes that personal and makes a comment back to you. And then you have what's called an online beef started. Okay. And mainly it's because, again, people do not look at the person behaviors, they look at the person themselves. And people make comments about the individual and never the behavior. So that's where I say the growth minded comes in. It's like, if you're going to put yourself out there you're going to put yourself in a position to say, I'm going to criticize a basketball player, football player, writer, movie star, actor, rapper, whoever it is you decide, blogger that you want to criticize, you should look back and say, do I exhibit some of those same traits? More likely you do, because we are human. And let me criticize the behavior. And you don't have to mention the person's name. That's what really, at the end of the day, that's what really bothers you is the behavior. It's not the person. Because you met another person with the exact same behavior, you're gonna be bothered the equal way. And you met another person with the exact same behavior, same thing. So it's never really the person. It's always the behavior that bothers you, the person is displaying. And if you deal and communicate and address the behavior, a person can say, oh, well, especially a person who's open-minded and willing to accept feedback. Oh, yeah, I can see how me acting that way at that particular time may have offended you, or you disagree with that. So let me change that, or let me take into consideration what you're saying. It's like as simple as if you and I got on our podcast, and my behavior was one to always, when I'm not talking, look off the screen and reach behind me and start doing other things to show I'm not really.
What do you mean?
Right. To show I'm not really connected and engaged with the podcast. Eventually, or maybe immediately, you might just say, look, King, your behavior's throwing me off. As opposed to, I hate doing a podcast with King. So it's just, that's how I look at it. We got to make these choices in the moment. And if you choose to be fully human and you choose love, I think that's always going to be the best outcome.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I would add, I think it's both behavior and even point of view. Sometimes, if somebody expresses a point of view that I don't like, and I don't think I do this anymore, but I might attack that person because of their point of view, which is the same move as attacking them because of their behavior. So I think both of those happen. In fact, there's the third appendix in Healing America's Narratives deals with an online version of that, where I show a real life Facebook exchange, and then I basically evaluate or analyze each person's comments, and if they were actually being rational and pointing to what it was that upset them, or if they were just attacking the other person. Most of them were just attacking the other person. So I actually agree with you 100%. God, that just, I don't get, when Facebook first came out and I joined it, I would get involved in that stuff where somebody would say something, say, who do you think you're talking to? Oh yeah, that's pretty useful. But I learned to say, I disagree with what you just wrote, and you insulted me. I'm not sure why you called me that name. Why did you do that? And a lot of people would just stop then. A handful of people actually wrote back and thanked me and said, I didn't realize I was doing that. I appreciate your pointing that out and not insulting me back. That was a minority, though. It wasn't like, on social media, most people don't do that. So.
Like you have behind those keyboards, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, any other tips or strategies you want to share with our listening audience for this week?
No, I think that would be the place to go. Is understand that one really important step toward committing to the truth. All right. Which means something that's evidence-based, that even people who have different backgrounds and different perspectives can agree on it. All right. So in other words, that's kind of truth we're talking about. One step towards that is committing to truthfulness. And truthfulness for me is another word for honesty. So in all of my interactions, in all of your interactions, whoever we're talking about, commit to remaining truthful when you speak or write to somebody else, which basically means if you really don't know what you're talking about, you say something like, I don't know enough about that to really have an opinion. That's a big deal to be able to say that. So truthfulness is one of the, I would say, rungs on the ladder towards being committed to truth. So that can be helpful too.
All right. Well, we're going to transition now. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Those are wise words for folks to implement and heed advice. We transition to the point of the show where we want to highlight someone from either the past or currently who exhibits the behaviors of someone living a fully human life or have lived a fully human life. And I'm going to say, for me, I'm going to choose this week is going to be Harry Belafonte. And I happened to see someone else mentioned him this week that brought that out of my mind, because I've always been a strong admirer of Harry Belafonte. He was a great elder, activist, great performer, but never lost sight of the fact of his love for his people, his love for humanity, and just the type of person that, I've listened to podcasts and people ask this question, which I always think is a great question. They say, who would you like to, if you name 5 people you would like to have dinner with, you can have dinner guests, past or present, who would be 5 people you would want to have dinner with? And Harold Belafonte definitely is one of those individuals I would love to have dinner with, would have loved to have had a conversation with him beyond being a fan, but just really sit down and have a human conversation about his life, the choices he's made, and just really learn lessons from a person who I believe that was a great, fully human individual.
Yeah, I mean, I loved him too. In fact, last week I just saw the documentary on the making of the song "We Are the World." And he was actually the initiator of that. He had that idea because he was helping. He was all over the world helping the poor and in a variety of countries. But and then he was in the with all of these stars. He was just standing in the back row, singing in the chorus and not taking any of the credit for it. So I love that you chose him. I just again saw that documentary last week. I'm going to go with Thomas Merton, and he's actually something he did ties in with what we're talking about today. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk, Catholic Trappist monk. He wasn't born into Catholicism, but he converted. He ended up being a prolific writer. They very protested against the Vietnam War, even though he died in 1968. In an accident. He died in his 50s. But he translated a book of poems from a Chinese philosopher poet Chang Tzu, and one of the poems, which I don't know by heart or even at all, and it's not Merton's poem, but I only know the poem because he translated it. Was about a man being out in a boat on a lake, a placid lake, and he sees another boat coming towards him. And he calls out, be careful, I'm coming towards you. And the other boat doesn't really change his course, and it keeps on going and getting closer and closer. And the two boats collide. And basically the poem is about he discovers first he gets all upset and he's yelling and screaming. Then he realizes that there's nobody in the other boat. It was just drifting, and it was completely his responsibility, whoever was in this first boat, to do something about it. He said the difference would be, he goes, once he saw that, he just laughed at himself, whoever this person is in the boat. But had there been another person, then it would have been, as you were saying earlier, the beef, right? The fighting back and forth between the two people. So we look to blame, and the poem does a great job of just capturing this in a few lines, much better than I just did in explaining the story. But in the absence of another person, who do we blame?
Absolutely.
Who's accountable? So I just want to, and I've read a lot of Merton. I refer to him in Healing America's Narratives. So I just, there's a lot more to him than just that translation. But he lived the life he was supposed to be living.
I know we kind of went over time. I just want to share this with you because it just came to my mind when you share that story. It reminds me of a story that Stephen R. Covey shares, and he talks about a shipboat captain.
Yeah.
And you familiar with the story I'm talking about now?
Yeah, because he told that story in 7 Habits. So it's in
there. Exactly. Well, not to tell that whole story, but it becomes a lighthouse, the eyes. Yeah. And he doesn't want to move. So it's the same thing you're saying there. no one to really communicate with. Either he was communicating with Lighthouse. The person with Lighthouse couldn't obviously move. So to me, it's the same thing. It's you making the right decisions that improve your life, and not saying to myself or saying to yourself that if this boat hits me, it's because why me? Why did the boat hit me? Why am I going through this in my life? And et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for sharing such a wonderful story. And again, choosing a wonderful topic as well.
Yeah, you're welcome. I love these conversations.
And thank you, listening audience, as well, for listening to us. If you're listening to us live, we definitely appreciate it. And if you listen to us as a replay, definitely do appreciate you listening to us, and definitely interact with us on Facebook. Share your comments. It's on Twitter as well and LinkedIn. So add your comments to some of the discussions we've made. Lastly, we want to update everyone of our new time, which is going to be going forward. Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've moved originally from Wednesday to Monday. Now we're moving back to Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So for those who are still with us, thank you for that. Reggie, again, thank you for being present. Thank you for bringing the energy. Thank you for being a 10. And I appreciate the opportunity to have this engagement with you. Thank you all. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., everyone have a great day. All right, let's continue to live more fully human.